recording when you're recording.
I'll just
there you go.
Setting record now.
Cool. Okay. And I'm recording the audio separately, so we'll have both. So hi, we are here today to talk about an idea that David has been really spearheading over several months based on his own interests in the cryptocurrency space and the blockchain ecosystem. And there's, of course, been a lot of hype around that over the last couple of years. But we do think that there are some existing projects and new protocols being developed and a lot of other work just being done that could either influence WordPress as a risk for bringing other systems to be a threat to WordPress, but more importantly, possibly potential advantages where WordPress can utilize its open source nature and other features to either adopt or build stuff on top of to encompass some of what's being built in the blockchain space. So we're not coming together today to say like, this is exactly what needs to be done. It's just a conversation around what are the various things potentially impacting WordPress and how can blockchain fit into all of that, and essentially have a working group. And this is essentially just an introductory meeting and a way to get started. So David is going to, I guess, kick that off in terms of saying who we are, and then we'll start to dig into some of the specific points.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Sorry to put you on the spot like that. I'm David Lockie. I run Pragmatic. We're a digital agency based down in Brighton. Most of the work we do is WordPress. Been going 7 years. There's about 50 of us. I fell into the kind of blockchain and crypto space about a year ago. I guess maybe a little bit more now. And I have kind of got deeper and deeper into it, despite what's happening with the kind of currently bearish crypto markets. I keep finding out new cool projects, new cool protocols. And as I think about our future as a business, how do we transfer what we do with WordPress? Or how do we kind of extend that? How do we elevate it so it's more strategic, and it's looking at the kind of 5-year roadmap of what technologies are going to come in and interact with WordPress? How do we evolve our service to be ready for that? And so I guess at a high level, my specific interest with blockchain and cryptocurrency is about how do we take the internet of information as it is now and underpin that with an internet of value that illuminates some of the behaviors that happen online. How can we encourage the stuff that's positive? How can we discourage the stuff that's negative? And just kind of understand that content economy a little bit better and learn how to design systems which help businesses, organizations achieve what we want to.
Cool. David, why don't you call out the different people that are next? Because I think your video order is different than everyone else's video order.
Yeah, no worries. Hey, so I've got Brad Williams. Do you want to say hi, Brad?
Hi. Oh, more than that. My name is Brad Williams, and I run a company called Web Dev Studios, which is also a WordPress agency. I think for me, what really kind of interests me in blockchain, and actually, I actually am here because I was told there'd be some free Bitcoins handed out. Is that not happening? Who's actually sending those out? Is that you, David?
Maybe. I thought that was Brian.
Okay, Brian, I'll hit you up after because I want my free Bitcoins. No, but what interests me about blockchain, I think, is even though it's been around for a number of years, it still feels like it's very much in its infancy in terms of different ways to use it outside of kind of cryptocurrency. And I think that's what is intriguing, because it just feels like it's not, I won't say it's an untapped market, but there's just so much potential or so many opportunities where blockchain, could potentially just be a really cool application, integration, whatever, around WordPress, around other things. But I think that's what really interests me, is it just feels, it is newish, right? It's newer technology. So there's just so many different applications currently out there, potential applications, ideas. So it's exciting because it feels new and fresh. And I think anytime you get involved in a technology that it does feel a little newer and just has a lot of open opportunities, it is just exciting because you don't get that chance very often in technology. Something at this scale, I think that of how big it could potentially be. So I'm definitely not an expert on all things blockchain, but the bit that I do know is certainly exciting. So that's why I'm here, besides the free Bitcoins from Brian.
Awesome. So these intros are going in no particular order, but we've got Brian Krogsgaard next. So Brian, thanks for the intro.
Yeah, so my name's Brian Krogsgaard, and I run Post Status. I've been interested in crypto for about a year and a half, although my awareness goes back probably closer to 2011 or 2012. Unfortunately, wasn't invested until more recently, but I've been diving deep into the crypto ecosystem over the past year plus, and some of the things that I've noticed are that there are a lot of interesting projects. There's a big focus on open source, but it's really an evolution of what open source is in our minds as people in the WordPress space, because there are a lot of people trying to decentralize the governance components of open source, as well as provide this idea of value on top of open source, so that there's actually more incentive for people to participate. And some of these ideas I found really interesting. In addition to that, I think some of the practical applications from a WordPress perspective I've been intrigued by, because I'm seeing people that are trying to create these cryptocurrency projects or blockchain-based projects where it's something that a tool like WordPress already does fairly well. And I just wonder what type of integrations there might be, whether that's around identification or just around permanence of establishing a forever history of content or whatever else. So I'm really intrigued about how WordPress and blockchain-based technology can fit together. That said, I also want to remain a skeptic, because I think that we need to be very slow and very careful about what we think the right type of integrations for this technology are with WordPress itself. And that's why I think it's worth exploring in a group like this. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. So Christy, do you want to say hi?
Sure. Hi, my name is Christy Chirinos, and I am one half of Caldera WP. The other half of Caldera WP is also here, my business partner, Josh Pollock. And I've been aware of this space since a lot of conversations started surrounding Ethereum in 2011, 2012. While I was a student of economics and information technology. So this was the thing that we were looking at very closely. And I've been interested in what is happening here from that lens. Blockchain technology is putting forth a technology that could change a lot of the underlying principles of what we think money supply has to be about. And to me, that's very interesting. A lot of the rules already of how money works are either represented within blockchain technology or could be changed with blockchain technology, right? One of the central tenets being this idea of decentralization. As economists, we understand that one of the key aspects of currency is central power, correct? And to me, that's very interesting how looking forward, this could change a lot of those underlying principles about how we think money works and how we think value works. And to me, coupling this potential with something that has a wide of a reach around the world as WordPress could be how this goes from a pie in the sky, academics and nerds are talking about it, into it actually gets incorporated into everyday people's lives. And to me, that's very interesting, and that's why I'm here.
Awesome. So over to the other half of Caldera WP, Josh. Do you want to say hey?
Hi, y'all. I'm Josh Pollock. I'm half of Caldera WP. I don't have an economics background, right? I have an environmental background, like that's what my degrees are in. So if you go back to like Matt Mullenweg's AMA on like r/WordPress, I got into an argument with him. This is my first interaction with him about it's an environmental disaster. And I still stand by that like Bitcoin, I don't own any cryptocurrencies because like I don't have independent wealth to invest, right? Like my $100. Oh my God, I think Bitcoin might go up by 300, right? 3 easier ways to make $200. But also I think it's immoral to participate in a machine that does very little besides destroy the environment by having massive carbon footprint for each transaction. So I got interested in cryptocurrency when Ethereum came about, because I was really interested in this idea of a network that was, yes, started as proof of work, which is a bad thing that should stop, like Bitcoin does, but is moved to is moving slowly to proof of stake to create something that's environmentally friendly and also scalable, and is centered around, right, like their tutorials are like, hello world, create your own currency, create your own autonomous corporation, right? So it's like, hello world, make your own currency, make your own autonomy. And that to me was super empowering. And I was like, yeah, I can get behind this. I can get behind smart contracts. And that gets really interesting to me about WordPress of, right, like we want to be open source and we want to empower people, but we're also sort of we as WordPress professionals are helping people be their own little mini empire instead of being part of this larger freedom sometimes. And I'm excited about what Ethereum-like networks provide for us.
Super cool. So on to the other Brad, the second Brad.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Brad Campolarian. I'm one of the partners and chief strategy officer for Alley Interactive. I joined today because, I mean, we at Alley are already integrating WordPress with blockchain through our partnership with Sybil. So, you know, we are already getting some experience directly in the field that is the topic of the conversation today. And you know, I'm very interested in blockchain's ability, specifically within publishing, to bring both a basis to support ethics in journalism and also sustainability from an economic standpoint. I mean, it's really a fascinating shift and a fascinating potential integration with WordPress. So, you know, and Sybil is directly using WordPress and WordPress VIP to support the publishing aspect of their project. So, you know, they're very much building something along the lines of, I think, what, you know, David was outlining in his proposed model for WordPress and blockchain, you know, at least very similar. So, you know, the question is, what can we learn from it? And, you know, is this something that WordPress themselves should incorporate to potentially expand sustainability for bloggers to a much wider network? So I think that's it for me.
Awesome. And finally, we've got the infamous Zach Gordon. So Zach, say hello. Tell us why you're into this space.
Howdy, y'all. Can you see me okay? And hear me? Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm really interested in this. Most of my work has involved education in the WordPress space, and lately a lot of JavaScript. And it's funny because a lot of people see like JavaScript as the future, and I already feel it's pretty antiquated, at least in terms of like just being applied to the front end. So for me, it's really about keeping a pulse, and I might be slightly less opinionated than some of you all about how it should be implemented, but I do want to make sure that wherever it goes, that I have resources to teach people how to do this stuff, whether it's JS-based or others, and so that as these decisions are made, nobody is lacking in terms of knowing how to do this from a technical perspective. So that's my perspective. And again, I'm also here for the free Bitcoins. I'm a big fan of those. So thanks everyone for doing this, and I'll hop back off video, but I appreciate being included in all this. Thank you.
I'm only giving away Doge.
Good. Well, something for nothing. So I guess to start, let's pick up on what Brad Campolarian said, which is about like any projects which are actually integrating blockchain or cryptocurrency technologies here and now, or any that you think are kind of if you had a week and a bunch of developers to do a hack with, like, what would you do? What integration would you like to test out? Or, what would be top of your backlog for playing around with? So, Brad, maybe you could lead the way by just sort of explaining exactly, or like describing a couple of the touch points with Civil, with WordPress and blockchain. And yeah, I guess like just shout out if you've got something you want to say as well.
I imagine you meant this, Brad. Okay. Yeah, I mean, so Civil has certainly developed their own blockchain, technology. They're about to in the next 2 weeks, finally have their ICO for the Civil token. All of those things, of course, exist outside of WordPress. But the sites that are part of the Civil newsroom still need a place to write content and publish, journalism. And they chose WordPress for the platform since it was, a great publishing tool, ubiquitous, simple to set up. And certainly WordPress VIP also gave them a great hosting platform. So, WordPress was a really easy fit there. I mean, they weren't looking to reinvent how they publish content. They were looking to reinvent, a larger ecosystem around that. So, we simply link with their technology via WordPress. And the primary integration is really, if somebody wants journalism to persist or a particular story to persist in the blockchain, so it's immutable, and cannot be removed and deleted, as we've certainly seen some less than ethical news organizations delete large swaths of content recently. This can now be done, and so now content can be published in a decentralized fashion. So it can't be, deleted by one site owner or administrator. It can persist, and that's a really interesting way to use blockchain to make journalism more ethical. The sustainable portion of it, remains to be seen. I'm very hopeful that Civil tokens are going to become a good enough investment for people to want to purchase them and support the news outlets that that they like to read. It's very interesting, to have someone just simply give someone money to read a story, but to make an investment, at the same time that you're actually helping to fund journalism by buying, a new cryptocurrency, I think is a really compelling argument. So I'm really interested to see how this plays out, through the rest of the year.
Yeah, awesome. And I've been keeping a close eye on the project, and I remember sharing a beer with you in Belgrade and just being like, no way you're actually building that. So super cool. And I don't know if you all caught the Indiegogo press release. They're going to be using their own cryptocurrency tokens for crowdfunding. So I just think it's really interesting how some of these strands are coming together, like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, GoFundMe, like all these crowdfunding platforms, integrating with the kind of cryptocurrency ICO space, and what does that actually add up to? So I'm going to jump in with a quick project that we've been doing. So we've been working with Coinbase Commerce to integrate their merchant tools with WooCommerce. So it's a pretty straightforward WooCommerce plugin that lets merchants take payment in the cryptocurrencies that Coinbase support, which is it's a pretty straightforward kind of an integration, but I think it points to the fact that overlap now between the WordPress space and the blockchain cryptocurrency space is now, it's here and now. How big and how fast that gets obviously remains to be seen, but yeah, interesting that of the 7 folks on the call, 2 of us have done, commercial projects, with this technology already. So I guess I just wanted to get that message across for folks who are not that into the space or into WordPress and thinking like, is this all pipe dream stuff, or is this here and now stuff? There's at least a couple of here and now touch points.
It's coming.
Yeah. Anyone else got any kind of here and now examples?
Yes. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to mention, well, I guess for one, I'm hesitant to just say, well, I want to say this or that token is great or this or that project are great, because I think it's really important to be skeptical of the token economy idea broadly, but to potentially embrace various things, whether it's payments or whether it's the inherent ideas of what you get out of a blockchain. But blockchain technology can be very difficult. It can be really challenging. So it's not necessarily like, oh, let's slap everything on there, because you're just making a very difficult to scale database, basically. And you may be running into various issues with like not being able to delete data by design and what that runs into legally. That said, I think that taking payments with crypto is a huge thing that is easy to be a leader in, whether that's via Bitcoin and the Lightning Network. There are already integrations with that. Additionally, like just regular integrations like Coinbase Commerce. I think there's some easy wins there with payments. What I would like to focus on are three things to me that fit as really nice use cases. One is around attention. So the basic attention token has really made a headway and fit with a lot of publishers. And that's another direct integration that exists with WordPress today. So I can have, if someone uses the Brave browser, which is just on top of the attention token, then if they visit my website, I can be paid because they're essentially giving an allowance. So it reminds me of the old reader days. So like people put a budget in for what they're reading and it automatically feeds them small micro payments. So I think that's really interesting. It's already existing in WordPress. And then another one is identification and global login. I think that there are already solutions, but there's not anything that's really figured out. And I think eventually being able to log into a WordPress site with a global login, I think the blockchain and the crypto world will really play a big role in identification. And I would like to see WordPress have nice integration there. And then finally, around governance, there's this whole idea of autonomous organizations and governance and bringing that to open source projects. And I would personally like to explore how that may look in a WordPress context and how governance can be potentially influenced in the way it happens with WordPress, because I think that's in the long term, like decades down the road, potentially one of our big weaknesses, depending on what Matt and other lead developers choose to do in life. And eventually WordPress is moving forward will have to be governed in a different way than it is today. Whether that's a 5 or 10 year view or a 50-year view, I don't know.
To add to the note of skepticism, something that I think is important for a group like this is to really watch out for the most vulnerable population surrounding this technology, simply because it is shrouded in so much mystery and that is so closely tied to money. It is a space that is ripe for exploitation. And even as we see now, we see a lot of things that are teetering and straddling the line between real and fake. And you especially see that in the way in which things are spoken about. And I think it's very important for a group like this to be mindful of those things. If we apply the structures that we currently have to understand the exchange and store of value, for example, it's questionable even to call cryptocurrency investments an investment. Right? If in the existing financial system, we consider investments to be purchases of things that we can have a fraction of something that holds intrinsic value, whether it's through an organization that creates and changes in value, we wouldn't refer to Forex trading or currency speculation as investment. We would call it Forex trading or currency speculation. And if we are talking about this token and we're talking about things that may be spent as currency but maybe not, and we don't know, we don't have answers to these things, it's up to a group of people who understand the wide breadth of something like open source technology and the complexities of something like blockchain technology to make sure that we carve out those differentiations, because you would be surprised to know even somebody who is very educated, right, or who wouldn't consider part of a vulnerable population to still be potentially at risk of having a big hole in understanding and a big thing that they don't know, and fall prey to a misinterpretation of what kinds of value something could provide. And that dials back to this idea of people who want to implement blockchain technology, and they don't understand that it's just like a giant slow database, right? And I think that that adds to the healthy amounts of skepticism and the healthy amounts of education that a group like this should be doing.
Yeah,
and it could be
awesome catch.
It could be decades before a lot of these ideas iron out. So I think taking a long-term lens on how WordPress may approach this entire ecosystem is really important.
And did John Oliver have a segment on that where he basically, like, if you had the word blockchain in your company name, like you were already valued at a higher valuation for no other reason than the fact that blockchain was mentioned?
Yeah, there were a lot of stock scams where stocks changed their name and put blockchain in it, even though they were like a food company or something.
Long Island IT.
Yeah, it was the Long Island iced tea one.
So here's the thing, is that like every part of the money economy is filled with scams, right? It's a great way to make money. And so this is nothing new. But what's kind of curious to me, because again, I'm not, like I keep going back to technology on this, because I'm not an investor, is that I see certain technologies that I see could solve WordPress problems, right? For example, we could store media image, uploads into a distributed file store like Skia or Storage. We could potentially execute some of the code in things like Golem or Lisk, right? And these all look really neat to me. Now, here's the problem that's not new, is I don't know if they're good or not, right? When people come into the WordPress plugin repository, they see 52,000 plugins, and most of them are not great. I like to think mine's good, right? I have friends who make very good plugins, and I know this to be right. Like I happen to say, let's say Devin Walker from WordPress Give. I trust him to make a WordPress plugin, and I've read some of his code. And I've read a lot of the code on my site. But I also buy from like AWS because I just trust them to build servers properly. I don't know anything about, anybody who works there, not anybody internally. But now as these folks who are kind of trying to build this stuff, we're in this new world of some of these things are scams because it's money. Scams are a good way to make money, and some of them aren't. And now we have to balance that side of it, the fact that it's new technology, and the fact that like some people go out to build something really cool and it doesn't work, right? Like that's how building stuff is.
What you bring up is a really good point.
Another layer.
What you bring up is a really good point, and you can use the idea of file storage as one. Like WordPress isn't going to just go and integrate with AWS because that's a really tight integration with a corporate entity. However, if there was an opportunity for WordPress to integrate with an open protocol, that could be really interesting. One of the risks is that just like sometimes we see some very gray area style blends between open source and corporate issues in the WordPress and open source landscape in the web. In crypto, a lot of times something that's called an open protocol is really a corporation in sheep's clothing. So being very, 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 very careful about integrating something because it's a protocol versus integrating something that says it's a protocol, but really it's just a company with a shell, and they wanted to be able to call themselves a utility token or something. That's really important. But that said, like eventually some of these things will get worked out, and there will be some really interesting protocols that, because it's an open source protocol now, could make it really fascinating for how that can be integrated into what WordPress is already doing.
Yeah, nice. Where to start? I'm picking some of that, right? I mean, this is, Josh, it is a bit new. Cryptocurrency is the only new asset class in the last couple of 100 years. It's the first time that people have ever been able to create money in a sort of decentralized way since we had kind of conch shells and handfuls of grain and kind of barter agreements. So there is a lot that's super new about this. And it kind of feels like it's a bit of a technology of its time as well. You know, in a world where it seems that technologists, whether we like it or not, are having to take more and more responsibility for what happens as a result of the software we create and the decisions we make along the way, whether that's accessibility or performance. It kind of feels inevitable that this sort of financial world's gonna collide at some point. And like with all technology stuff, like with AI, it feels like it's happening super quickly, and that the people who are, you know, the people in organizations who are too slow to address it, too kind of hesitant about the challenges, are also going to be the ones that potentially lose out from some of the kind of riskier, faster moving ones. But of course, you know, knowing what that balance is the hard thing. Has anyone else got any other kind of, sorry, I just went totally philosophical there, having said, let's talk about practical applications of blockchain technology. Has anyone else got any projects that they're thinking about? What would you do tomorrow given unlimited budget?
Hey there, this is Zach here. If I could just jump in real quick. I don't, like I said, maybe know as much as everyone else here on it, but to me, the quickest place or first point always seemed like the data storage, right? Like what can be brought in there, and it seems it's already been doing. And just because you asked, like, what would I try to tackle first, that would probably be my like proof of concept to try to go from, and maybe a little bit riskier than some of the other integrations that we're talking about.
Cool. So the line was a bit bad there. Data storage, you mean like the WordPress content itself, Zach, or the WordPress site?
Yes, correct. Yep. The content itself.
Yeah, I mean, I had one of those like, oh, I should do this in a weekend, and then I like either did my job or spent time with my wife or something like that. Moments where I was looking at like Menlo One, which is like this, hey, we're gonna do a distributed social networking sort of thing for discussions and award people for like creating value in the in the conversation with a cryptocurrency. And also and it's a neat like React front end on top of Ethereum's Web3.js library. So I was thinking about trying to port that into some sort of WordPressy like format, possibly using like some of the Gutenberg components, especially now that Drupal's been nice enough to abstract those to a pure JavaScript language package. Thanks, Drupal folks. But yeah, again, right? Like if I had 2 weeks just to build something and I thought that was a commercial business, that would be me. Like take something that already exists and people who are already building an ecosystem and have already launched a cryptocurrency, already launched their ICO, and just try and build something WordPressy on top of that.
Blockchain Spotify. Everybody laughs when I say that, but I'm so serious. I'm so serious. And it's not like Spotify isn't thinking about this. It was a few months ago that I think they purchased a small blockchain technology type company based out of Brooklyn. Perhaps because they're also thinking this, but what do I mean by that? I quite literally mean that the music business is an example of a business model that's kind of fallen apart in the information age, and we're still trying to figure it out. Last night, I read this really interesting article about how Taylor Swift, right, like America's favorite pop star, is signed a record contract, right? That was like an over 10-year record contract that's about to expire. And what will she do next, right? Now that she is an international pop star and she is going to have free reign over herself and her brand and whatever. And the numbers that showed the kinds of revenue that she brings in said each one of her shows in her latest tour brought in a handful $1 million. And I couldn't help but think that's it. Right, and that's the primary driver of revenue, right, for one of the world's most popular singers. And again, that comes from it probably can't be too expected that there can be that much revenue brought in from things that aren't concert sales, right? And that's for one of the most popular recording artists in the world. And so to me, this idea that the music industry could somehow leverage blockchain to recapture the value that comes out of each stream, each play, is an interesting idea outside of WordPress. But you asked unlimited budget, unlimited time.
There are, and I think that's an interesting component too, because there are a lot of projects where they're essentially trying to give publishers a fighting chance, or give content creators, or whatever you want to call that, music creators. It doesn't matter if it's audio or if it's video or if it's content. There's platforms for all of this. And one of the things that I found interesting is like WordPress is really good at a lot of these things. So one of the big opportunities I see, and like what Ali is doing with Civil, is where can WordPress fit into that conversation versus what you see a lot right now is people are like trying to recreate the idea of a content management system or a web platform or whatever, where sometimes there's already something great and open source. It just doesn't have crypto or blockchain in its name or whatever. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for integrations and ways to work together. So that's why I think that's super interesting. And the other thing I would add is, and this gets more into the risks component, is that there are crypto projects, and I don't know if any of these will work, but essentially aiming to replace everything from the pipelines, like from the hosting components to asset delivery to the DNS itself, and taking that to a blockchain-based landscape. And it's not that I think WordPress needs to be worried or anything like that, because I think as self-hosted software, it should blend well. I just think it's more about over the coming years, I hope that we're ready. So if something does take off, like imagine DNS being impossible to discriminate against by nation state. So like they can't block the pipes. To me, that fits well within the moral scope of what WordPress strives to be, of democratizing publishing. And I want WordPress as a project to be ready to support that type of thing, more so than feeling like, oh, well, this is some great way to make revenue or whatever. I think WordPress can just fit in really well in some of those applications.
So don't let anybody's business partner know I said this, but read Andreas. His first name's Andreas, and the last name starts with an S. Was the lead developer RxJS.
Oh.
Right. I think he worked at Microsoft or something on the Angular team. I can't remember. But he wrote this article about why he was quitting his job to go save the internet from itself. And it starts with why IP version 4 created a lot of our problems because there were a limited number of places you could connect to the internet and you needed a centralized middle person, which when I got on the internet with some nerds down at CMU, but now it's Comcast, who, like Brian's talking about nation states intercepting your HTTP traffic, but Comcast does that. Somehow that's legal, right? Like if you or if Brian does that, that's called computer hacking. Like if Brian changes what I request from the internet showing up on my screen, right? He can go to jail for that, but Comcast does it day to day. And so I really recommend that article, and I'll forward the link, because it's about what happens when everything switches to IPv6 is the reason why we need a Comcast goes away on a lot of levels. And that's really exciting to me. And I really do hope that, as we start getting into, we don't need these gatekeepers, and we don't need, a big company like Amazon to store our data for us anymore. I am concerned about the WordPress space because I go into a WordCamp and it's pretty clear who's paying for those, right? It's hosts. They're the big sponsors because they have the big money. And I like going to WordCamps. I like promoting my business at WordCamps, right? I like my friends having jobs at these hosts. I like hosting my sites on them, right? That's a concern to me for our ecosystem.
Yeah, I
Even
mean,
if I agree with it.
I mean, WordPress became as ubiquitous as it did, partly or even largely because of the hosts, because there were so many places where you could just give someone money and click a button and you had a site, and you could pick a theme and get up and running. And I think that sometimes even I forget that. I'm sure some of us forget it as we are probably get used to building, for those of us that are in agencies, lots of enterprise sites where, already now WordPress is only a component of the site that we're building. It's handling the things that WordPress is good at, publishing, content management, but the front end is built in some other technology entirely, or WordPress is powering a mobile app, or something that's not even on the internet. And in this sort of like blockchain future that we're talking about, and sort of what we're seeing with our work with Civil is like in that ecosystem, WordPress is handling the things that WordPress is good at, being a publishing tool. But it can fit into a larger ecosystem where it's not everything and it's not the entire site. But that is not the use case for 99% of the people using WordPress. They are using the full stack and themes and plugins, and essentially relying on a host to make the magic work for them and to get their content out on the internet. So I think we're a long ways off from WordPress being fully disrupted in that regard. The disruption will probably start earlier in the 1%, in the enterprise market, where you have a lot more smart technologists working on things, and you can see things start to shift a lot more quickly, and interesting projects pop up.
Yeah, interesting. Although I kind of feel like WordPress is under threat from from all angles. The Squarespaces, the Shopifys, all sorts of platforms do a great job, and in a lot of cases a better job for a specific use case than WordPress as a general toolkit. For me, that's a good kind of microcosm of the macro thing, which is when we started off with the web, we needed a user management tool, we needed a content management tool, we needed a front end, we needed a back end, we needed all these different bits and pieces. And I guess that's kind of analogous to a lot of organizations, right? Not every organization needs to manage their customers' identities directly or take payments through their own on-site check handling facility. So as organizations, one of the things I enjoy most about this space is asking those kind of questions of organizations. Like if if blockchain was here and if we took these things away because they were just global services that you integrated with, what would be the core of your organization? Like what's its pure essence, and what else is sort of stuff that you need to put into place to allow that core activity to happen? And I wonder if we ask the same question about WordPress, what is that kind of single killer app that WordPress will always do and will always strive to be super great at, if we imagine that there's kind of onion skins of stuff that can be abstracted away over time?
Publishing content, right? That's the heart of it. And I think, right, that's the heart of any CMS, or especially WordPress, is publishing. So, I think like we're already seeing with WordPress integration, a lot of it's going to be, and in the next few years, there'll probably be a lot of low-hanging fruit, like you said, accepting cryptocurrency payments, or kind of basic integrations, accountability in a ledger, or logs, security logs, things like that, things that just are an easy fit and make a lot of sense, are easy to kind of digest, right, for us to understand, and people that maybe aren't into some of these technologies to wrap their head around. 'Cause some of the stuff is, you start digging in and learning about how something works, and you quickly go into a rabbit hole where it gets extremely technical and extremely hard to really truly understand it, and even so to explain it to people that are non-technical is almost impossible in some, or feels that way. So we're starting to see the low-hanging fruit, but I think I like the stuff that Brad's doing there at Alley and Civil is sounds really cool, and I could even see that type of setup for larger companies, that, because a lot of companies, we probably have worked with them, or we have, I'm sure most of you have too. Big corporations have tons of websites on WordPress, and they're always trying to share content, right? And it's a bit of a clunky process, whether you're using the REST API or behind the scenes via WordPress APIs and functions, or maybe there is kind of a centralized ledger for the single source of truth for this content. But I think that's a very interesting play around the media side of WordPress, which is always, in my opinion, going to be the heart of what WordPress does, which is publish content.
I think you bring up a good point too, and we've been talking a lot about WordPress broadly and crypto projects broadly, whether it can be integrated or how they can be used or whether it's a threat. I think one thing that we should very strongly advocate is for people that are interested in building plugins or products or integrated services to go experiment with the projects that you personally like or find interesting, because I think it's a huge opportunity for WordPress developers to work together or integrate with some of these blockchain projects that they find interesting. And if I've seen anything, it's that a lot of people that were doing something with a plugin business or a theme business or whatever, or maybe their consultancy is a little slower. Like, this is a growing ecosystem with a whole lot of people and a demand for talent. And I think it's a really, really ripe opportunity for people that are really great at WordPress to start working to integrate with a lot of these crypto projects and explore business opportunities in a variety of ways. And I think the ones that really start to stand out and really feel like they're working then can become the candidates for whether or not there's a place for integration at a project level.
So what's neat about what, am I cutting you off, Kirsty? I apologize.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so what was neat about what Brad said is, I just read this article this morning about the longest running blockchain, which started in 1995, and publishes the hash of its blocks in the of the week in the New York Times classified section. Right, they take the hash of a document. Right, they build a desktop software that takes the hash of a document that they want to verify is immutable, and they add it to their own ledger. And then at the end of the week, that's essentially a block, right? And then they hash that entire block and place it in the New York Times as the public copy. And the guy who founded Ethereum jokes that the weakness there is somebody has to create a fake New York Times, which is a good joke, and then give it better publication than the New York Times. But what's neat is that that's the longest running commercial use case of blockchain, is what Brad's talking about, is verifying that published content, if it's on a document or anywhere, is what was in it, right? And what's also neat is now that blocks, especially repeatable blocks in Gutenberg, are a thing that we can get out of the database individually. It would be really cool if, instead of embedding a tweet, which is not terribly well verified, I could embed in my post, I could embed one or more blocks that Brad has flagged as being licensed for repeat. And the people who are reading them would be able to know that I'm not, faking what Brad says, right? That it just wouldn't work. Their browser would somehow tell them I'm, impersonating Brad, not repeating Brad according to the permissions. And I think that's really neat. And it's the thing that these have actually been used for commercially for.
What I think is really interesting. Okay. What I think is really interesting about Brian and Brad and Josh, what you're saying is that I don't think that we can underestimate. Well, we're all excited about what the WordPress community can do with blockchain, and I'm here to talk about that. But we cannot underestimate what the WordPress community can do around blockchain. I've seen what kinds of people show up to WordCamp looking to WordPress as an entry point into a career change, looking to WordPress as an approachable introduction into the world of information technology services. And the WordPress community is one of those few sort of behemoths that would actually have a significant influence, right? For example, it was brought up to say, that if we put out there, here's some interesting projects you should work with, those projects would see a massive spike in interested people. And definitely not underestimating the kinds of reach that we could have surrounding conversations with blockchain and surrounding education, opinion, and advocacy is something to think about moving forward.
Yeah, and that sounds like a great one to pick up next time. What do we take from being a WordPress community? How can we help a different open source community? So, I think we're all about to jump onto different calls. That's the joy of being people who do work for other people. So I guess, Brian, can I lean on you for a professional sounding wrap up and a call to be involved for next time?
Sure. Yeah. I think I'd like to start by just saying thanks for anybody that actually listened to this and is interested in this stuff. I'd like to also reiterate that we're not talking about any of this from an investment perspective, from an advocacy perspective for particular projects. We really want to approach this in the sense of what's possible for WordPress, what are risks to WordPress, how we think the crypto world, whether that's the community or the technology, could potentially influence WordPress, what role the WordPress community can play in that space. Because whether you like or dislike the blockchain and crypto ecosystem, it's going to be a part of the technology sector for a long time to come. And I think it's important for us to be aware of it, cognizant of it, and open to ideas. So that's what this is. This is a working group around WordPress and blockchain. And we hope that if you did find this interesting, that you'll comment or participate, write a blog post about what you're thinking about, that kind of thing, and we'll share that back. And then if we have future calls or whatever, then we'd like to pull in as many people as possible. And then finally, I'd just like to thank David Lockey for wrangling people and having these conversations and getting the conversation started, because I think that this should be something that's fruitful for the WordPress community for a good time to come. So yeah, thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone.
All
Good
right.
to speak to you all.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, David.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Send me my coin, Brian.
Send me your Doge address.
Oh, well.
See y'all later.
Bye.